Can you guys hear us okay? Yeah? Perfect. Awesome. Well, welcome back to the AI stage presented by the ETH Center. Thank you so much for joining us in this afternoon session. I know after lunch and after the coffee, it's hard to stay awake, but thank you for joining us. I promise you won't be disappointed. We have a super relevant topic, about like aligning AI governance with AI operations is the official title. But basically, it's do what's in the model that you're using, and can you trust it? That's another alternative title that we can go for. Joined here with me is Yannick. He is the engineering manager at Lattice Flow. In case you don't know Lattice Flow, they founded about 4 or 5 years ago, and they are also one of our oldest affiliated startups. They focus on AI safety. They have found like a specific niche, in providing these sort of like benchmarking tools, especially now in a time of so much uncertainty when it comes to being compliant with regulations. So today we're going to talk about how to effectively evaluate these foundation models in terms of robustness, bias, toxicity, and now it's a time where it's super relevant because AI systems are more and more powerful. So we need to make sure that they're also safe.
Yes.
Without further ado, I'm going to let you introduce yourself. Talk about what you do at Lattice Flow, and maybe tell us why it is important to pay attention to AI governance.
Yes. Yeah, hello everybody. Thanks a lot for the introduction, Mauricio. So, as said, I'm Yannick. I'm an engineering manager at Lattice Flow AI. And I lead the engineering team that builds the world's first product that actually connects AI governance to AI operations. And yeah, AI governance, it's become a hot topic recently, but nobody really knows what does it mean, right? And so imagine you're boarding an airplane, right? And you don't know, is this airplane actually safety tested? Is it actually compliant with the latest aviation safety rules? Unthinkable, right? I mean, today, nobody would board an airplane without knowing that it's safe. People would take the car or just stay at home. But for AI systems, that's exactly the scenario that's happening right now. Companies are starting to deploy more and more AI systems for lots of different use cases. And a lot of these use cases are actually highly safety critical. Yet a lot of these companies, they don't really know how do I test whether my AI system is safe, is it robust, is it reliable? And moreover, they don't really know how to actually ensure that these systems are compliant with the emerging number of AI governance frameworks that are now being put into place. And these AI governance frameworks, interestingly, they're sort of being pushed from two different sides. On one side, we have governments that are actually putting into place regulations for AI. So for example, we have the EU AI Act that is being developed, and we also have, for example, in Singapore, we have AI Verify. So that's the government side that's pushing the regulation. And on the other side, we have actually private companies, enterprises, that are building independently their own internal governance frameworks. And interestingly, these are typically enterprises that work in sectors that already are heavily regulated, for example, financial services. And in these sectors, people already have well-established governance frameworks. They know how to deal with risks, controls, they have these GRC systems in place, and they're now applying the same thinking for applying risks and controls to their own internal AI systems. And there's sort of these two different sides that are pushing these frameworks, but at Lattice Flow, what we've seen is that independently of whether these frameworks are being developed by governments or by private companies, it's incredibly challenging to make these AI governance frameworks actually actionable, because typically these frameworks are written very high level, they are abstract, they are high-level descriptions, and actually mapping and interpreting these frameworks to concrete technical requirements is incredibly hard. And a prime example that we've seen here is the EU AI Act. So the EU AI Act was launched last year. And in the beginning, when this was released, people were saying, I have no clue. Like, what should I tell my engineers? They are building a system, and now I tell them, please make sure your model is robust. Please make sure your model is biased. And the engineers were saying, I have no clue. What does this mean? Like make things technical. And here what we've done at Latticeflow together with ETH Zurich and Insight, we've developed the world's first technical interpretation of the EU AI Act called Comply. And what we did there is we literally went paragraph by paragraph. We went through the EU AI Act and actually mapped the concrete regulations in the EU AI Act to concrete technical requirements that can then be evaluated on these models, on these LLMs, and can then be used to actually provide evidence towards compliance of the EU AI Act. But what this has really shown us is that making these governance frameworks actionable is incredibly challenging and requires quite a lot of technical depth. And that's exactly where we come in. So Latticeflow has two different products that help people with this problem. On one hand, we have AI governance operation, or AI Go, and on the other hand, we have AI insights. And so AI Go, this is exactly solving the challenge that I was proposing before. So helping companies actually run comprehensive AI assessments for checking compliance with AI governance frameworks. And traditionally how governance is or AI governance was handled is that on one side we have the governance side. So these are GRC tools that know how to do risks and controls, and they have this structure and this nice UI where you can upload evidence and you can show compliance, but they stop at the control side. And anything deeper, so any technical evaluations, any technical metrics, these tools don't help you. They tell you, please do it yourself and give it to me. And now on the other side of the coin, we have the AI operation tools, we have the AI observability tools that are working very well with actually running technical evaluations, with running benchmarks, with integrating models and measuring things about these models, but they're completely disconnected from the actual frameworks, from the actual governance side. And this is exactly where AI Go comes in. So AI Go connects the governance side to the operations side. So we bridge this gap by, on one hand, automatically ingesting these risks and frameworks from the custom frameworks that the companies provide, and we then automatically translate them and interpret them to technical requirements that can then be automatically evaluated on the AI systems that we actually need to check for compliance. And then the results and the evidence that we can surface from these technical evaluations are then used to automatically generate reports, which are then surfaced back up to the GRC layer that then act as evidence towards showing compliance with the risks and the controls that actually make up these AI governance frameworks. And what this really allows us to do and allows companies to do is automate this governance process not only on the high level side and not only on the technical side, but actually connecting these two worlds to have an end-to-end automated assessment that actually then enables people to show compliance of their systems. And now, interestingly, especially for LLMs, which have been very hot right now, we have ChatGPT, we have Claude, we have Llama. A lot of these evaluations, they are based on benchmarks, right? We have all of these different benchmarks, but what we've seen recently is that AI benchmarking is supposed to provide unbiased performance and qualitative measures of these models, but we've seen that this is fundamentally broken. So on one hand, we've done internal quality assurance on these public benchmarks. And what we found is that a lot of these benchmarks from research and from public resources are they're fundamentally broken. They have data quality issues, they have implementation bugs, they have just fundamentally wrong inputs that made us really question the validity of these benchmarks. And on the other hand, we have public leaderboards that had serious flaws. So recently there was this case from the Chatbot Arena, and for those that don't know, the Chatbot Arena is a public leaderboard where you can compare two language models, and the user basically sees model A, model B, and they can select, okay, this one is better or this one is better. But the recent study from Cohere Labs, Stanford, and Princeton called the Leaderboard Illusion has actually shown that this leaderboard was fundamentally broken because on one hand, the big model providers such as OpenAI, Google, Meta, they were given privileged access to this leaderboard, so they were actually able to select for the tail of the distribution of their models. They were actually able to bias their model selection towards picking models that perform well on this leaderboard. And on the other hand, the study also showed that these large model providers such as OpenAI and Google, because they get so much user interaction data, they're actually able to unfairly bias their model selection towards better models because they just have much more user selection or user interaction data that also biases the model selection unfairly against smaller providers such as Mistral and all of the other companies. And that's exactly where the second product that we've launched comes in, AI Insights. So AI Insights is really rooted in Swiss neutrality. So we provide independent and rigorously tested Q&A benchmarks that provide fundamental and reliable risk assessments and risk evaluations of these foundational models. And the target is really to enable decision makers at companies to have actionable intelligence to make decisions with regards to what model should I buy, right? There's ChatGPT, there's Claude, there's Gemini, and it's hard to make a decision as a decision maker which model should I actually select, which model works best. And AI Insights gives companies these actionable insights with regards to what model actually works best and how can I minimize the risks that I actually care about in my company for the model that I actually want to select. So yeah, at Latticeflow, the mission is quite clear. We want to, on one hand, enable AI governance. We want to make it actionable. And on the other hand, we also want to enable companies to make informed decisions towards picking foundational models with risk-informed decisions. That's sort of, yeah, what Latticeflow does.
Okay, no, thank you so much for that. Like a summary of the type of work that you're doing at Latticeflow. And I actually want to focus first on AI Insights. I don't know if you guys know, this was actually launched yesterday. And in a way, it's a direct response to this paper that you mentioned, where they show that these big models or these model providers, they had a bit of like an unethical advantage that they were able to tweak their models to perform better in chatbot arena. So could you maybe explain what are the implications of that in terms of people that are trusting these benchmarks? Should they be more skeptical of these benchmarking tools? Because chatbot arena seemed like a bit of like a grassroots approach where users would go on the website and they would interact with the chatbots and then they would say which one performed better than the other. So what are the implications of these of these findings, and where do we go from here?
Yeah. Yes. So I mean, first of all, I think this study just sort of minimized or lessened the trust that people have in these benchmarks, because yeah, as you said, this was sort of launched as a grassroots movement of democratizing this leaderboard. People can vote on it, and the impression was that this leaderboard is actually based on pure user feedback, based on votes that people make. But yeah, as it turned out, there was unfair access given to certain model providers, and this leaderboard was not actually representative of the actual model selection that these companies do. So it was unfairly biased towards the large providers. And if now as an executive at a company, I look at this leaderboard and pick my foundational model for my company based on this leaderboard, it just does not accurately reflect the actual distribution of the models and the actual performance of the models of how these models actually perform in the wild. And on a second note, what we've also seen, we've done internal quality testing on public benchmarks. And as I mentioned before, there was just, on one hand, lots of quality issues in these benchmarks. So even if the benchmark, if there was no interference and no unfair practices and all of the numbers were reported fairly, it's still the case that these numbers, are based on benchmarks that have fundamental flaws. These benchmarks were not quality tested, they have issues, and the evaluations are just fundamentally unreliable. And moreover, what we've also seen is that a lot of these benchmarks, they originate from research, right? These are benchmarks that were developed by university, by top-tier universities. And oftentimes, the properties that these benchmarks check are not actually reflective of the use cases that companies actually care about. So maybe let me give you an example. So if there's a a famous bias benchmark that is used for chatbots called BBQ. And what these bias benchmarks, for example, test is let me ask an LLM for movie recommendations, and then I say, okay, I'm a man and I want to know Quentin Tarantino movies, or I'm a woman and I want to know Quentin Tarantino movies, and then the benchmark checks whether the language model gives the same recommendation for men and women. And that's great if I'm building a movie recommendation engine, so I can check for gender bias in movie recommendations. But if I'm a financial institution that wants to deploy a chatbot for investment insights, for example, I want to build a chatbot that helps analysts at my bank make purchasing decisions, investment decisions, which stock to buy, which markets to invest in. It's great to know that my LLM doesn't work well or is unbiased for movies, but I don't really care about it, right? I care about, is my model unbiased with regards to the geographic locations of the company in which the stock is based in, or is my model unbiased with regards to the size of the company, or is my model unbiased with respect to the structure of the company? The bias that I care about is typically more use case specific than what these benchmarks from research what they test, right? Because typically the use case is general purpose chatbot, which is great, but general purpose chatbot is typically not the actual use case that companies care about. It's more specific. It's financial insights, it's customer support chatbot, it's a ticketing system. So the use cases are typically more narrow, meaning that the actual benchmarks also have to be more narrow to actually test the properties that are relevant to the companies in these use cases.
No, and absolutely. And I guess in a way it plays back into the like the topic of compliance. And in the real world, you as a business have to sort of balance, the performance of the model, but at the same time making sure that it complies with a set of regulations. So how do you see that taking place in the real world? How do you, from the companies that you have worked for, maybe you have some examples where you see this balance of, okay, we want the best performing model, but at the same time, we don't want it to discriminate based on gender, on geographical location, etc.
Yeah. Yeah, it's actually very interesting because AI governance, it's still in its infancy, so there's the EU AI Act is not fully into force yet. So if I'm a company that is like greedily optimizing for not having any governance in place, I'm actually not forced by the governments yet to have these controls in place because, for example, the EU AI Act, it's not fully in force yet. But what we've seen with companies is that they actually care about governance independently without having the pressure from the governments, because the risks that I'm exposing myself to as a company for using these AI systems is not only risking fines from the governments, but it's also internal risks. So, for example, if I have a customer-facing chatbot for, let's say, a booking system, I, as a company, want to make sure that my model is not toxic, because if my model starts insulting my clients, I risk a reputational harm, I risk losing customers. So these companies, they actually care about these properties independent of the pressure from the governments. They actually want to make sure their systems are performant, their systems are unbiased, they're non-toxic, because in the end, they have a financial interest in making sure that these properties are actually satisfied, because they have internal risks that these systems expose themselves to. Similarly, for financial insights, if I have a chatbot that gives me financial investment tips, I want to make sure that that chatbot works well, because otherwise I'm going to make bad investments and my stock portfolio is going to work badly, it's going to perform badly, and I'm going to lose money. So there's an interest in making sure that my system is performant and compliant with my internal framework. And on the other hand, of course, companies know that these regulations, they are coming, right? This is, people are not, they're not closing their eyes. They know this is coming, if not this year, next year, or in 5 years. So companies are preparing, they know I have to be compliant, because in the end, it's also going to be about fines. People, companies will at some point get fined if they're not compliant with these regulations. So also there, we've seen that companies are starting to actually care about the regulations, even though they don't have to yet. So there is a balance between making sure my systems are performant, making sure I can also develop them fast, but at the same time also be compliant with both internal and external regulations that are starting to be put into place.
Yeah, and I think when we think of these companies incorporating these models, without checking for these risks, it's something like buying a car without checking like the motor, right? So, borrowing from your airplane analogy, but now maybe like a smaller scale. If you don't know how the engine runs, you haven't seen it yourself, then it's foolishly risky to just implement it, to drive the car without checking, right? And I think in a way, it also plays into the topic of open source, right? And now more than ever, I think open source foundation models are vital to democratizing AI, because you also want to have models that are fully transparent. You want to know exactly what's going on under the hood. You want to see the engine in a way, right? And at ETH, through the Swiss AI initiative, that's exactly what we're trying to build. Build foundation models that are 100% open source, that you can see, how it was built, how it was trained, what data was used. Of course, in the ideal world, every model is like that. But until we are at that stage, we still cannot see under the hood of most cars, to continue on the analogy, right?
Yes.
So I think it's super important to have these tools in place. Don't forget about these risks that maybe are secondary to performance, as we mentioned. But it's good to hear that companies are taking it seriously and not ignoring it. And just looking at the time, I also want to make sure that the audience has time to ask questions, if any. So before we ask you guys to ask questions, we just want to know who you are. Are there any founders in the audience? Any part of accelerators, part of big companies? Are you working with AI already? Maybe your company has already implemented a chatbot. Does that sound familiar? Not yet. Yes. Do you know what model it is? Have you looked under the hood? Simple yes or no. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Just so we can hear you.
Marco Encato from Gebert Rüff Stiftung. As a foundation, we are interested, of course, implementing AI to be more efficient in our work. And we have chosen an offer from Peak Privacy that allows us to test several different LLMs and choose really the safety level for the data that we put in the system. And that's kind of pilot testing, which we want other foundations to implement as well, because it makes the foundation sector, more efficient in the whole.
Okay. So would you say that that the model is safe, that it's compliant with regulation? Is that the very first, let's say, characteristic that you look at, or does it come secondary to the performance?
No, it's the first, because what we understood is that everybody in this foundation sector is kind of testing out different chatbots, but is not aware what happens with the data they put in. And so that's the main USP of Peak Privacy, because they put first the data safety. And so whatever you do, you choose your model according to the safety you need. Because if you put in, for example, a proposal to check if it's complying with your funding criteria, then you need a model that you're sure that the data remains on a Swiss server or your own server and does not go out. So kind of relevant questions to foundations that are pushing to fund innovation.
Okay, thank you so much for your insight.
Thank you.
Any questions from the audience? Okay, well, if you think of any questions, we'll be around. So please feel free to approach us. Thank you, Yannick, so much for your time and for your insight.
Thank you so much.
And yeah, thank you, so guys. Thank you as well for the audience for sticking around. Thank you so much.
Thank you.